My name is Devin Wright, and this is the compelling narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to ask you a question. What is your favorite movie? It's a question that I'm sure you've heard before, maybe at a social event or on the first day of class. Don't worry, you don't need to share. I can't hear you anyway, but I ask because your answer is important. This question, what is your favorite movie? It's a litmus test that serves to tell others more about you. Communication theory tells us that who we are, how we speak, how we eat, how we perceive the world around us, and even our posture is determined in large part by the media we consume. Your favorite movie is probably your favorite because you have grown in some way just by watching it. For me, the movies I grew up with, like Star Wars and Indiana Jones, they have made me want to emulate the characters in those movies, and thus, that has given me a craving for adventure, to go off and explore the world just as they do. It's for this reason that I believe cinema is by far the greatest invention of the 20th century, because of how it has such a profound effect on our society. It's just ironic because, well, filmmaking is such a difficult process. I mean, with a book, you might have 1 to 2 writers and a couple editors at the most. But with a film, you have to worry about your actors, your screenwriters, costume production, cinematography, all while having to operate under a studio-approved budget. There are so many moving parts, so much that could go wrong at one time. It's amazing these films are any good to begin with. That is why one of my favorite pastimes is breaking down these movies to see where they work and how they might fall short. While I could break down the whole filmmaking process, I thought it would be best to cut away the weeds and instead focus on something that I'm at least somewhat qualified to discuss: the story. After all, the story is the most important part. Without it, the rest would fall like a house of cards. The information I'm about to share with you focuses on what you need to write a compelling narrative, regardless if you're a screenwriter, an author, or a dad sitting around a campfire. It's as simple as asking yourself these 3 questions. Does the story make sense? Does it represent reality? And does the audience care about your characters? A writer doesn't necessarily need to follow this formula in order to make a good story, but great movies, books, TV shows, and even speeches can confidently answer these questions. So let's begin with the first one. Does the story make sense? Admittedly, this is the easiest question to answer. If you can't comprehend the events that take place in your story, then odds are your audience won't have a clue either. You need to give a clear reason why your story is moving in the direction you want it to go. But I would take that one step further and say you need to make it a good reason that serves not just to develop your characters, but the world they inhabit as well. A story that does this really well is The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is centered around the destruction of the One Ring. Right away, it is established that evil cannot be defeated as long as the ring exists. And the only way to destroy the ring is to cast it into the volcano it was forged in. Thus, our heroes need to get there before evil consumes the world. We have our point A, our point B, our reason for getting there, and what should happen if our heroes fail. It's pretty simple, but it makes sense. As our characters embark on this journey, they encounter different roadblocks along the way that serve to show the audience the dangers that lie beyond. Ghoul-infested mines, corrupted leaders, and scorched landscapes, all reminders of the impending threat. Your reason for getting to point B should serve to complement the world and build your characters beyond just flat and basic archetypes. Something important to keep in mind is the intelligence of your audience. As a writer, you should never assume that they won't notice a flaw or inconsistency in your story. And this applies especially if you are writing to children. Our brains are excellent when it comes to detecting these errors. We are so good at it, in fact, that you might not even know that there is an inconsistency, but your mind will tell you that something is wrong by making you feel some form of discomfort. This phenomenon relates directly to the second question: does the story represent reality? Or, in other words, does it allow you to suspend your disbelief? For those of you who don't know, the suspension of disbelief is the threshold one has to cross in order to find something believable. The extent of this threshold is different depending on the type of story, but it occurs in every form of communication. Now, when I ask the question, does it represent reality, that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to mirror our reality. Some of the best stories being told right now involve a super soldier, a god of thunder, and a man whose strength depends on how upset he is that day. These three are unfathomable in the real world, but they are believable because they follow a consistent set of rules that are logical, just like we do. As the writer, you have the freedom to create these rules as you see fit, but keep in mind that the term rule has very broad implications. They don't just dictate how your universe works, but who your characters are, how their superpowers work, if they're superhuman, and how they behave in certain situations. You need to be careful because you have to uphold these rules. Otherwise, your audience will lose their suspension of disbelief and they will stop caring about your story. I call this the Batman conundrum. Batman is a cultural icon, and whether you have seen any of his movies or not, you are likely to be familiar with this. Batman does not use guns, and he does not kill. Countless Batman stories revolve around this. His villains see it as a weakness, and they frequently take advantage of it. To the audience, this rule has become synonymous with the character. It's what we come to expect from a Batman movie. So if a writer were to depict Batman killing people with guns, they would have to reasonably justify the change or have the audience be yanked out of the story wondering, hey, what the heck just happened? This might sound like an annoying crutch, but the truth is you can have a lot of fun despite the potential restrictions. For instance, in the movie called Baby Driver, the main character is constantly listening to music in order to tune out his tinnitus. Thus, the events of the film move to the beat of whatever he is listening to. My favorite example of this is when a car chase with the police is put on hold because the main character has to restart a song. As long as you abide by the rules that you put in place, your freedom as a writer is still unrestricted. Lastly, there is the final question. Does the audience care about your characters? This is the most important part because it is often the most misunderstood. According to John Truby, a screenwriter with over 1,000 films under his belt, quote, "Many writers think the way to make the audience care about a character is by making them as detailed as possible," meaning they add as many character traits as they can. This is not the way to go. What makes an audience care about a character comes down to only two things: the fundamental weakness of that character and their goal in the story. End quote. By nature, human beings are flawed, and we acknowledge, challenge, and hate those flaws every single day. Thus, it might seem contradictory to make your hero a broken character, as we often look to media as an escape from our broken selves. But the truth is that if you allow your hero to confront their flaws and conquer them, that is what makes a character compelling. What John Truby is saying is that the character's motivation to get from point A to point B should at some point force them to confront and conquer their flaws. A few minutes ago, I asked you what your favorite film was. Even though it's a simple notion, I believe your answer has everything to do with your cultural upbringing. And now that I have shared what I believe are the vital ingredients to make a compelling story, I ask that you look at your favorite film or book or whatever and see how it stands up to these three questions. How does it make sense? Does it represent reality? And why do you care? It could help you discover more about yourself, or it could help improve your communication. Cinema might seem like an elevated form of storytelling compared to the type of communication that we do every day. But the truth is that these points are valuable even in our face-to-face conversations. It's all about how we convey information.